What if every tragedy that befell the Pride Lands wasn't random misfortune, but calculated strikes in a war that's been raging for generations? What if Scar's corruption, Kopa's disappearance, and Zira's fanatical devotion weren't isolated incidents, but coordinated moves in a master plan so sophisticated that its architects have remained hidden in plain sight? The evidence has been there all along, scattered across decades of royal history, like pieces of a puzzle no one thought to assemble. Until now. Consider the timing. Every major catastrophe in Pride Lands history follows an identical pattern. A period of prosperity and stability, followed by the emergence of a corrupted royal family member, leading to chaos that threatens the very foundation of the kingdom. The intervals aren't random, they're strategic, calculated to strike when each generation reaches its peak vulnerability. Scar's transformation from Taka, the brother who saved Mufasa from crocodiles, into the calculating regicide who orchestrated his own brother's demise, didn't happen overnight. The Lion Guard series reveals a crucial detail that most dismiss as backstory. The strange lion who led Taka into a trap, resulting in the venomous cobra bite that began his descent into madness. But this wasn't a chance encounter between two lions. The precision of the setup, the timing, the specific choice of venom that attacks moral reasoning while leaving intelligence intact. This bears all the hallmarks of a coordinated psychological operation. The corruption signature is unmistakable once you know what to look for. Each targeted individual shows the same progression: initial idealism and strong family bonds, followed by a catalytic event involving an outsider, then gradual isolation from support systems, and finally, complete moral inversion where love transforms into hatred. The method varies: psychological manipulation for Scar, physical trauma and indoctrination for Zira. But the end result remains consistent. A former royal ally becomes the greatest threat to the bloodline's continuation. Kopa's disappearance represents perhaps the most sophisticated operation in this pattern. Unlike the obvious corruption of Scar, Kopa's elimination was designed to appear like a tragic accident or wild animal attack. Zira's involvement wasn't the rage-fueled assault of a grieving follower. It was a precisely timed strike that removed Simba's heir during the crucial period when the Pride was most vulnerable. The location, the method, even the cover story that followed, all point to advanced planning and detailed knowledge of royal family routines. But here's where the pattern becomes truly disturbing. The perpetrators always seem to have inside knowledge that no ordinary outsider should possess. They know which family members are most susceptible to corruption, when security will be weakest, and exactly which psychological triggers will produce the desired response. This isn't the work of lucky opportunists. It's the product of systematic surveillance and infiltration. The visual evidence supports this theory in ways that are impossible to ignore once you start looking. The strange lion shares specific physical characteristics with multiple antagonists across different generations. The same eye coloration, facial structure, and even distinctive markings that appear in lions who supposedly have no blood relation. These aren't artistic coincidences. They're genetic markers that suggest a coordinated breeding program designed to produce agents capable of infiltrating royal circles. More troubling still is the behavioral consistency across supposedly unrelated villains. Zira and the strange lion share identical tactical approaches: the use of psychological manipulation to turn family members against each other, the preference for proxy attacks rather than direct confrontation, and the systematic targeting of succession lines rather than current rulers. These are learned behaviors, passed down through a network that has been refining its methods across multiple generations. The adoption and exile patterns reveal another layer of the conspiracy. Notice how often orphaned or lost cubs appear during periods of political instability, only to later emerge as threats to the established order. The timing of these arrivals coincides perfectly with intelligence-gathering needs, arriving just as new royal cubs are born, staying long enough to map family dynamics and security weaknesses, then disappearing before suspicions can form. Even the geographic patterns support this theory. The outlands aren't just a convenient refuge for exiled lions. They're a staging ground that provides perfect cover for reconnaissance operations. The proximity to Pride Rock allows for detailed surveillance while maintaining plausible deniability. The harsh conditions serve as both training ground and motivation, creating hardened operatives who view the Pride Land's prosperity as something to be seized rather than protected. The psychological profiles of corrupted individuals show another consistent pattern. Each begins with legitimate grievances that are then amplified and redirected by outside influences. Scar's jealousy over succession, Zira's trauma from childhood abuse. These weren't manufactured emotions, but pre-existing vulnerabilities that were identified and exploited with surgical precision. The corruption process always begins with validation of genuine pain before gradually reshaping that pain into a weapon against the royal family. Perhaps most chilling is the realization that this pattern extends beyond individual operations to encompass systematic generational warfare. Each strike isn't just aimed at immediate disruption, but at weakening the bloodline's long-term stability. By eliminating potential heirs, corrupting family bonds, and creating internal conflicts, the architects ensure that each generation is weaker than the last, more susceptible to the next wave of attacks. The scope of coordination required for such an operation suggests resources and organization far beyond what any single outsider group could provide. The consistency of methods across decades, the precision of timing, the sophisticated understanding of royal psychology, all point to a network that has been operating with institutional knowledge and long-term strategic planning. These aren't coincidences. They're not even related attacks by different groups with similar goals. The evidence points to something far more disturbing. A single coordinated conspiracy that has been systematically dismantling the Pride Land's royal bloodline through multiple generations of perfectly timed strikes. The question isn't whether such a conspiracy exists. The pattern is too consistent, too precise to be anything else. The question is who has been orchestrating it and what their ultimate objective really is. The strange lion isn't a lone wolf seeking personal revenge. He's the field commander of the most sophisticated infiltration network in African history. The evidence for this becomes overwhelming once you trace the operational signatures back through multiple generations and realize that no single individual could have orchestrated attacks spanning decades with such precise coordination. The network's recruitment strategy reveals its true scope. They don't just find disaffected lions and corrupt them, they breed them. The genetic markers that appear across multiple antagonists aren't coincidental. They're the result of selective breeding programs designed to produce agents with specific physical and psychological characteristics. The red eyes, distinctive facial structures, and aggressive temperaments aren't random traits. They're carefully cultivated features that serve operational purposes. Consider how the infiltration actually works. The network identifies kingdoms during periods of stability and prosperity, then begins a multi-generational process of weakening them from within. They don't attack directly. That would unite the kingdom against an external threat. Instead, they place agents who appear to be refugees, lost cubs, or romantic partners seeking acceptance. These agents integrate themselves into the royal circle, gather intelligence, and wait for activation orders that may not come for years. The adoption vectors represent perhaps the most insidious aspect of their strategy. Notice how often orphaned cubs appear during crucial periods in royal family development. Kovu's placement wasn't random. It was timed to coincide with Kiara's birth, ensuring that Zira's adopted son would be the exact age to form romantic connections with the next generation of royalty. The network doesn't just plan months ahead, they plan decades ahead, positioning assets for operations that won't activate until the cubs reach adulthood. The Venom signature reveals the network's most sophisticated weapon, biological warfare specifically designed to corrupt moral reasoning while preserving intelligence. This isn't something any ordinary lion would know about, let alone have access to. The precise knowledge of which cobra species produces venom that attacks ethical decision-making centers while leaving tactical thinking intact suggests scientific understanding that could only come from extensive experimentation and research. More disturbing is the realization that the venom method represents just one tool in their arsenal. The psychological manipulation techniques used on Zira, the strategic placement of abandoned cubs like Kovu, the timing of exile operations, each represents a different methodology perfected through trial and error across multiple target kingdoms. The Pride Lands aren't their first victim. They're their most successful case study. The command structure becomes visible when you map the relationships between seemingly unconnected antagonists. The strange lion doesn't give direct orders to lions like Zira. He doesn't need to. The network operates through ideological conditioning and shared objectives rather than traditional military hierarchy. Each agent understands their role in the larger plan and executes their part without requiring constant supervision. The intelligence-gathering operation is perhaps their most impressive achievement. Somehow, they always know exactly when royal families are most vulnerable, which individuals are susceptible to corruption, and what specific psychological triggers will produce the desired response. This level of detailed knowledge requires either supernatural insight or an extensive surveillance network that has been monitoring royal families for generations. The exile manipulation reveals another layer of their sophistication. They don't just wait for lions to be exiled, they engineer the conditions that lead to exile. Scar's increasingly erratic behavior after his corruption wasn't just personal deterioration, it was designed to isolate him from potential support systems and drive him toward dependency on outside guidance. The network creates the problems they later offer to solve. The breeding program evidence becomes undeniable when you compare physical characteristics across multiple generations. The strange lion shares distinctive features with lions who appear decades apart in different contexts. Zira, certain members of her pride, even some of the supposedly rescued cubs who appear throughout royal history. These aren't distant relatives coincidentally showing up. They're products of a deliberate genetic program designed to produce operatives with specific capabilities. The operational timeline reveals coordination that spans multiple decades. The corruption of Scar was timed to occur just as Mufasa's reign reached its peak stability. Kopa's elimination was scheduled for the precise moment when Simba had established his authority, but before the next generation had matured. Zira's activation came exactly when the Pride had lowered its guard after defeating Scar. Each operation builds on the psychological damage of the previous one, creating cumulative trauma that weakens the royal family's ability to resist future attacks. The network's understanding of royal psychology is too precise to be accidental. They know that exposing corruption gradually is more effective than sudden revelation, that family bonds can be weaponized against themselves, and that creating internal conflict is more devastating than external warfare. This knowledge comes from systematic study of royal family dynamics across multiple target kingdoms. The recruitment of local assets reveals the network's most chilling capability. They can turn anyone. Zira wasn't born evil. She was systematically broken down and rebuilt according to their specifications. The process appears to begin with identifying individuals who have experienced genuine trauma, validating their pain, and then gradually redirecting their anger toward targets chosen by the network. They don't create hatred. They focus and amplify existing grievances until they become weapons. The geographical coordination shows operational sophistication that extends far beyond the Pride Lands. The Outlands serve as more than just a refuge. They're a forward operating base that allows for continuous surveillance and rapid deployment of assets. The harsh conditions aren't just punishment for exile. They're training grounds that produce hardened operatives capable of extended undercover operations in hostile territory. Perhaps most telling is the network's patience. They're willing to wait decades for the right opportunity, to sacrifice individual operations for long-term strategic advantage, and to adapt their methods based on changing circumstances. This isn't the behavior of revenge-seeking outcasts. It's the systematic approach of professional operators working toward a specific long-term objective. The evidence points to a chilling conclusion. The Pride Land's royal bloodline has been under systematic attack by a coordinated network that has been refining its methods across multiple generations. The strange lion isn't just a villain. He's a field commander in a war that the royal family doesn't even realize they're fighting. The question is no longer whether such a network exists. The pattern is too consistent, the coordination too precise, the methods too sophisticated to be anything else. The question is what their ultimate objective really is, and how close they've come to achieving it. The network's true genius lies not in individual operations, but in their systematic weakening of the royal bloodline across 5 distinct generations. Each strike was carefully calibrated to create specific vulnerabilities that would make the next generation more susceptible to corruption, elimination, or control. This isn't random violence. It's a methodical process of institutional destruction that becomes more sophisticated with each iteration. Generation 1. Mohatu's Era. Establishing the baseline. Mohatu's reign represents the network's initial intelligence-gathering phase. During this period, they weren't yet ready for direct action, but they were studying royal family dynamics, identifying succession patterns, and mapping psychological vulnerabilities that could be exploited in future operations. The appearance of Choyo during this era wasn't coincidental. He was the network's first successful placement within the royal circle. The adoption of Choyo established the precedent that would become central to all future operations. The royal family's compassion could be weaponized against them. By presenting themselves as lost, abandoned, or seeking refuge, network agents could gain access to the inner circle and begin the slow process of mapping family dynamics from within. Choyo's integration into Mohatu's pride provided the network with detailed intelligence about royal decision-making processes, security protocols, and individual personality profiles that would prove invaluable in subsequent operations. The drought crisis during Mohatu's reign served as both a test case and intelligence-gathering opportunity. The network observed how the royal family responded to kingdom-threatening emergencies, noting which family members took initiative, how succession decisions were made under pressure, and what support systems the royals relied upon during crises. This information became the foundation for all future strategic planning. Generation 2. Ahadi and Uru, setting up internal division. The second generation marked the network's transition from intelligence gathering to active destabilization. Choyo's corruption during this period wasn't the result of personal inadequacy. It was the activation of a long-term asset who had been positioned specifically to create internal conflict within the royal family. The timing of Choyo's turn toward selfishness coincided perfectly with Ahadi's ascension to the throne, creating maximum disruption during the crucial transition period when the new king was most vulnerable. This wasn't coincidence. It was strategic timing designed to exploit the natural stress points in royal succession. The network had studied Mohatu's reign long enough to understand exactly when and how to strike for maximum psychological impact. Uru's quest to solve the water crisis represents the network's first attempt at elimination through seemingly natural hazards. Her journey into unknown territory during pregnancy created the perfect opportunity for an accident that would remove a key royal family member while appearing completely random. The fact that she survived and succeeded suggests either incomplete intelligence or deliberate restraint, possibly because her elimination at that specific moment would have united the kingdom against external threats, rather than creating the internal division the network required. The birth of Taka during this generation provided the network with their most crucial strategic asset, a legitimate royal heir with genetic predisposition toward the psychological vulnerabilities they needed to exploit. The network's detailed knowledge of Uru's family genetics, combined with their understanding of Ahadi's personality, allowed them to predict with remarkable accuracy which child would be most susceptible to future corruption. Generation 3. Mufasa, Scar, the successful corruption. The third generation represents the network's first major operational success, the complete corruption of a royal heir and his transformation into an active agent working against his own bloodline. The operation's sophistication demonstrates decades of refinement in their psychological manipulation techniques. The strange lion's approach to Taka wasn't random encounter. It was a carefully planned activation sequence designed to exploit specific vulnerabilities that had been identified during years of surveillance. The choice of venom, the timing of the attack, and the precise psychological manipulation that followed all suggest advanced knowledge of Taka's personality, insecurities, and relationship dynamics with his brother. The corruption process followed a refined methodology that the network had perfected through previous testing. Isolate the target from support systems, provide validation for existing grievances, introduce external chemical psychological factors that impair moral reasoning and gradually redirect hatred toward strategic targets. The precision with which this process was executed suggests institutional knowledge and systematic approach rather than improvised manipulation. Mufasa's elimination marked the network's first successful regicide, but more importantly, it demonstrated their ability to turn royal family members into weapons against their own bloodline. Scar's actions weren't just the result of personal ambition. They were the culmination of a multi-year conditioning process that transformed a loving brother into a calculating adversary willing to destroy everything he had once protected. The Hyena Alliance represents another aspect of the network's sophisticated strategy, using existing tensions between different species to create proxy forces that could destabilize the kingdom while maintaining plausible deniability. The network didn't create the conflict between lions and hyenas, but they certainly understood how to exploit it for strategic advantage. Generation 4. Simba's Era. Precision, elimination, and deep cover assets. The fourth generation marked the network's most sophisticated operations to date. The surgical elimination of specific succession threats combined with the placement of deep cover assets capable of long-term infiltration. Kopa's disappearance represents a quantum leap in operational precision compared to previous generations. Unlike the obvious corruption of Scar, Kopa's elimination was designed to appear like a tragic accident or wild animal attack. The operation required detailed knowledge of royal family routines, security protocols, and individual behavior patterns that could only have come from extensive surveillance. The timing, striking during childhood when the heir was most vulnerable but before succession could be definitively established, demonstrates strategic thinking that considers decades-long implications. Zira's role during this period represents the network's most successful deep cover operation. Her integration into Scar's inner circle wasn't opportunistic attraction to power. It was a carefully planned infiltration designed to ensure network influence regardless of which faction controlled the throne. Whether Scar succeeded or failed, Zira was positioned to continue the network's objectives through the next generation. The adoption of Kovu reveals the network's most chilling capability, the systematic production of royal-quality heirs who can be positioned as legitimate succession candidates while remaining loyal to network objectives. Kovu's bloodline, training, and psychological conditioning were all carefully designed to make him capable of ruling effectively while serving network interests. The exile manipulation that sent Zira and her followers to the Outlands wasn't a defeat for the network. It was a strategic repositioning that placed their assets in perfect position for the next phase of operations. The Outlands provided both training ground and forward operating base for future infiltration attempts. Generation 5. Current Era. Accelerating Threats and Systemic Vulnerability. The current generation faces threats that represent the culmination of decades of systematic weakening. The royal bloodline has been so thoroughly compromised that standard defensive measures are no longer sufficient to ensure kingdom security. Kiara's relationship with Kovu represents the network's closest approach to complete infiltration success. Had the operation succeeded as planned, they would have placed a network-trained asset as king consort, giving them direct influence over succession decisions and kingdom policy for the foreseeable future. Only Kovu's genuine emotional attachment to Kiara disrupted this otherwise flawless operation. Kion's absence during crucial periods demonstrates how the network's previous operations continue to create vulnerabilities decades later. The psychological trauma inflicted on previous generations has created defensive responses that sometimes work against kingdom security, leaving gaps that trained operators could exploit. The pattern acceleration becomes visible when you map the timeline intervals between major operations. Early attacks were separated by decades, allowing time for kingdoms to recover and populations to forget previous threats. Recent operations follow much tighter schedules, suggesting either increased network capabilities or recognition that their window of opportunity is closing. The mathematical precision of attack timing reveals coordination that extends far beyond individual operational planning. Each strike occurs at precisely calculated intervals designed to exploit predictable stress points in royal family development. Succession transitions, coming-of-age ceremonies, courtship periods, and the establishment of new family units. This level of precision requires institutional knowledge that spans multiple generations of network operators. Perhaps most disturbing is the realization that each generation's defensive improvements have been systematically countered by network adaptation. Enhanced security measures prompt more sophisticated infiltration techniques. Improved succession protocols result in more precise elimination timing. Increased awareness of external threats leads to better psychological manipulation designed to create internal ones. The evidence suggests that the current generation represents either the network's final push toward complete victory or their last opportunity before defensive measures become too sophisticated to overcome. The accelerating pace of operations, the increasing precision of targeting, and the systematic exploitation of previous psychological damage all point toward an endgame that may be closer than anyone realizes. When you lay out all the evidence systematically, the scope of this conspiracy becomes undeniable. The physical, behavioral, and temporal proof creates an interconnected web that spans generations, revealing coordination so precise it could only result from institutional planning by a network with resources and knowledge far exceeding anything previously imagined. Physical evidence, the genetic signatures. The most compelling proof lies in the distinctive physical characteristics that appear across supposedly unrelated antagonists spanning multiple decades. The strange lion's red eyes don't just randomly appear in Zira. They're a dominant genetic trait that surfaces in network operatives with mathematical consistency. When you map these occurrences across the timeline, the pattern becomes impossible to dismiss as coincidence. The facial structure analysis reveals even more disturbing connections. The distinctive angular features, elongated muzzle shape, and specific ear positioning that characterize the strange lion appear in modified forms throughout multiple generations of antagonists. These aren't artistic similarities. They're genetic markers that suggest controlled breeding programs designed to produce operatives with specific physical capabilities. The scar patterns provide perhaps the most damning evidence. The mark across the strange lion's eye doesn't just coincidentally resemble Scar's wound. It follows an identical trajectory, depth, and healing pattern that suggests either the same infliction method or deliberate replication. When similar markings appear on other network associates across different time periods, it becomes clear that these aren't battle scars, but identification markers that serve operational purposes. The eye coloration data becomes particularly significant when you realize that red eyes in lions are genetically recessive, making their repeated appearance in strategic contexts statistically impossible unless deliberately cultivated. The network has been selectively breeding for this trait because it serves specific operational advantages, possibly enhanced night vision or psychological intimidation factors that aid in infiltration operations. Body proportions across network operatives show consistent deviations from standard Pride Lands lions. The systematically larger frame size, enhanced muscle development, and increased bone density all suggest selective breeding for physical capabilities that would be advantageous in combat or extended undercover operations. These modifications don't occur naturally. They're the result of generations of careful genetic manipulation. Behavioral pattern analysis, the operational signatures. The behavioral consistency across network operatives reveals training protocols that have remained unchanged across multiple generations. Every corrupted individual follows identical psychological progression patterns. Initial idealism, catalytic trauma event, gradual isolation from support systems, validation of grievances by external sources, and finally, complete moral inversion, where protective instincts become destructive impulses. The tactical approaches show institutional knowledge that couldn't be acquired through individual experience. The preference for psychological warfare over direct confrontation, the systematic targeting of succession lines rather than current rulers, and the consistent use of family bonds as weapons all demonstrate refined understanding of royal psychology that could only come from extensive study and previous operational experience. Communication patterns reveal another layer of coordination. Network operatives consistently use identical phrases, metaphors, and conceptual frameworks when discussing their objectives. This linguistic consistency across different time periods and geographical locations indicates standardized indoctrination processes that ensure operational unity even when agents are working independently. The manipulation techniques employed by different operatives show remarkable sophistication and consistency. The process of identifying psychological vulnerabilities, the gradual escalation of dependency relationships, and the precise timing of revelation, betrayal cycles, all follow protocols that suggest institutional training rather than improvised methods. Decision-making patterns across network operatives reveal shared strategic priorities that transcend individual motivations. Every agent consistently chooses options that weaken royal bloodlines even when personally disadvantageous, suggesting conditioning that prioritizes network objectives over individual survival or advancement. Timeline analysis, the coordination intervals. The mathematical precision of attack timing reveals coordination that extends far beyond coincidental opportunity exploitation. Major operations occur at intervals that perfectly exploit predictable vulnerability windows in royal family development cycles, suggesting advanced planning that considers decades-long implications. The infiltration schedules show remarkable consistency across multiple generations. Network assets are consistently positioned 12 to 18 months before they're needed for operational activation, allowing sufficient time for integration and intelligence gathering while minimizing exposure risk. This timing precision requires advanced knowledge of royal family planning that could only come from extensive surveillance or inside information. Gap analysis reveals periods of apparent network inactivity that correspond perfectly with royal family strength cycles. Operations are suspended during periods when kingdoms are most capable of effective response, resuming precisely when defensive capabilities are weakest. This suggests continuous monitoring and adaptive planning that adjusts operational schedules based on real-time kingdom assessment. The succession targeting timeline shows that network operations consistently occur during the 6-month windows when royal heirs are most vulnerable to elimination or corruption. These windows occur predictably every 15–20 years as new generations reach critical development stages, and network strikes hit these targets with remarkable consistency. Cross-generational operational spacing reveals strategic patience that individual actors couldn't maintain. The network consistently waits 20–25 years between major operations, allowing sufficient time for kingdoms to lower their defenses while ensuring that institutional memory of previous attacks fades from public consciousness. The adoption, kidnapping network infrastructure. The systematic placement of orphaned cubs reveals logistical capabilities that require extensive territorial control and resource coordination. The network consistently produces young lions with appropriate bloodlines, training, and psychological conditioning at precisely the moments when target kingdoms are most likely to accept adoptions. The geographical distribution of found cubs shows that the network maintains breeding facilities and training centers across vast territories. Cubs appear from multiple directions and backgrounds, but all share consistent physical and behavioral characteristics that suggest centralized preparation programs. The timing coordination between orphan placements and royal family developments requires intelligence networks capable of monitoring multiple kingdoms simultaneously. Cubs arrive within months of royal births, ensuring age compatibility for future romantic or succession manipulation, suggesting advanced planning that spans decades. The documentation forgery capabilities become apparent when you realize that every orphaned cub arrives with believable backstories that withstand initial scrutiny, but begin showing inconsistencies only after deep investigation. This level of identity construction requires resources and expertise that far exceed what individual outcasts could provide. The rescue scenario staging reveals that network operatives consistently engineer circumstances that make royal families grateful for taking in abandoned cubs. These scenarios appear natural, but follow patterns that suggest deliberate orchestration designed to bypass normal security protocols. Zira's true role: deep cover asset analysis. Zira's integration into Scar's inner circle shows infiltration techniques that go far beyond opportunistic attraction to power. Her psychological profile, timing of appearance, and specific skill sets all suggest preparation for deep cover operations rather than spontaneous alliance formation. The relationship development between Zira and Scar follows protocols consistent with intelligence asset cultivation rather than genuine romantic attraction. The systematic validation of Scar's grievances, the gradual assumption of advisory roles, and the strategic timing of offspring production all suggest operational objectives rather than personal motivations. Zira's knowledge of royal family history and protocol exceeds what any ordinary outsider should possess. Her detailed understanding of succession law, ceremonial requirements, and internal family dynamics indicates either extensive briefing or previous direct contact with royal circles under different circumstances. The training programs Zira implemented for her cubs show institutional knowledge of military tactics, psychological conditioning, and operational security that couldn't be acquired through personal experience alone. These programs follow methodologies that suggest formal instruction in systematic warfare techniques. Zira's survival capabilities in the Outlands demonstrate preparation and resource access that contradict her supposed exile status. The network clearly provided ongoing support, equipment, and intelligence that allowed her to maintain operational effectiveness despite apparent isolation from power structures. Pride lands as testing ground. The laboratory evidence. The operational complexity targeting the Pride lands exceeds what would be justified for simple territorial conquest or resource acquisition. The systematic nature of attacks, the sophisticated methodology employed, and the careful documentation of results all suggest that the Pride lands serve as a testing environment for techniques that will be deployed elsewhere. The escalating sophistication of operations over time indicates systematic refinement of methods based on previous results. Each generation faces more precise attacks that incorporate lessons learned from earlier failures, suggesting institutional learning and improvement protocols. The geographical positioning of the Pride Lands provides perfect conditions for testing infiltration techniques, isolated enough to contain operational failures, prosperous enough to represent valuable targets, and strategically located to serve as a gateway for expansion into neighboring territories. The psychological profile of Pride Lands royalty presents ideal testing conditions for corruption and elimination techniques. The family's emphasis on unity, compassion, and trust creates maximum vulnerability to the specific manipulation methods the network has developed. The evidence web is complete and damning. This isn't a collection of unrelated tragedies. It's a systematic campaign of infiltration, corruption, and elimination that has been refined across generations by a network with resources and capabilities that challenge everything we thought we knew about the scope of threats facing the royal bloodlines. The ultimate objective isn't territorial conquest or resource acquisition. It's something far more insidious and far-reaching. The network has been conducting a systematic experiment in the complete dissolution of the Circle of Life philosophy, using the Pride Lands as a testing ground for techniques that can destroy the foundational beliefs that hold kingdoms together. The true target: philosophical infrastructure. The Circle of Life represents more than just a spiritual belief system. It's the organizational framework that enables peaceful succession, interspecies cooperation, and sustainable resource management across multiple kingdoms. By proving that this philosophy can be corrupted, subverted, and ultimately destroyed, the network demonstrates that no kingdom is truly secure, regardless of military strength or defensive preparations. The systematic corruption of royal bloodlines serves as proof of concept for a broader campaign against philosophical stability. Each successful operation provides data on how long established belief systems can withstand coordinated assault, which psychological pressure points are most effective across different cultures, and what level of resource investment is required to achieve complete institutional collapse. The mathematical precision of their timeline reveals the true scope of ambition. The network isn't planning for immediate conquest. They're establishing methodologies that can be deployed simultaneously across multiple kingdoms once the techniques have been perfected. The Pride Lands operation provides the template that will be replicated on a continental scale. The focus on succession disruption targets the most vulnerable aspect of any monarchy: the transfer of power between generations. By proving that royal bloodlines can be systematically weakened, corrupted, or eliminated, the network demonstrates that traditional governmental structures are inherently unstable and can be brought down through patient infiltration rather than costly military campaigns. Pride Lands as the perfect laboratory. The geographical positioning of the Pride Lands makes it ideal for testing infiltration techniques that can later be deployed elsewhere. The kingdom's relative isolation allows for controlled experimentation without interference from neighboring powers, while its prosperity and stability provide conditions that mirror other high-value targets across the continent. The psychological profile of Pride Lands royalty presents optimal testing conditions for corruption methodologies. The family's emphasis on compassion, trust, and inclusivity creates maximum vulnerability to the specific manipulation techniques the network has developed. Success here proves the methods will work against any target that shares similar values. The cultural influence of the Pride Lands extends far beyond its territorial boundaries. Other kingdoms look to Pride Rock as a model of successful governance and peaceful succession, demonstrating that even this paragon of stability can be systematically undermined, sends a psychological message to royal families everywhere that no one is truly safe. The resource wealth and strategic location provide additional testing opportunities for economic disruption techniques. The network has experimented with various methods of destabilizing prosperity: drought manipulation, hunting ground contamination, and resource scarcity creation, all of which provide valuable data for future operations against economically important targets. The multi-species integration in the Pride Lands offers unique opportunities to test techniques for exploiting intergroup tensions. The success of operations like the Hyena Alliance provides blueprints for turning allied species against each other in other kingdoms, creating civil conflicts that weaken overall defensive capabilities. How close they came to total success. The network's closest approach to complete victory occurred during Kovu's infiltration operation. Had the plan succeeded as designed, they would have achieved something unprecedented, placing a network-trained asset as king consort with direct influence over succession decisions and kingdom policy for multiple generations. The Kovu operation represented the culmination of decades of preparation and refinement. Unlike previous attempts that relied on corruption or elimination of existing royalty, this approach would have provided legitimate succession while maintaining network control. The psychological conditioning, bloodline preparation, and tactical training invested in Kovu represented their most sophisticated asset development program to date. The failure of the Kovu operation occurred only because of factors the network couldn't predict or control: genuine emotional attachment that overrode conditioning protocols. This represents a critical vulnerability in their methodology, the human element that can't be completely eliminated through psychological manipulation. The timing of the operation's collapse came at precisely the moment when network victory seemed assured. Zira's forces had successfully isolated the royal family. Kovu had gained complete trust and access, and the succession pathway was clear. Only the intervention of uncontrollable emotional factors prevented complete infiltration success. The aftermath of the failed operation revealed both the network's resilience and their vulnerability to exposure. While they maintained operational security and avoided revealing the broader conspiracy, they also lost their most valuable deep cover asset and years of preparation. The setback forced them to reconsider their entire approach to long-term infiltration. Current status, remaining threats, and loose ends. Despite the failure of major operations, the network retains significant capabilities and continues to pose active threats to kingdom security. The elimination of visible assets like Zira and the Strange Lion doesn't address the institutional infrastructure that created and supported them. The breeding programs that produced network operatives remain intact and continue generating new assets with each generation. The genetic markers that appeared in previous operatives will surface again in future operations, potentially in kingdoms that have no awareness of the broader threat pattern. The intelligence networks that provided detailed knowledge of royal family vulnerabilities continue operating under deep cover. The surveillance capabilities that enabled precise operational timing haven't been disrupted, meaning future attacks will maintain the same precision and coordination that characterized previous operations. The training facilities and resource bases that supported extended operations remain hidden and functional. The Outlands served as just one forward operating base in a network that likely extends across multiple territories and kingdoms, providing redundant capabilities that ensure operational continuity despite individual setbacks. The ideological framework that motivated network operatives continues spreading through underground channels. The philosophical opposition to the circle of life doesn't disappear with the elimination of specific individuals. It represents a competing worldview that will continue attracting adherents and producing new generations of operatives. The Continental scope, evidence of broader operations. The sophistication and resources demonstrated in Pride Lands operations exceed what any regional threat could provide, suggesting coordination with similar networks operating across multiple kingdoms. The institutional knowledge, breeding programs, and technological capabilities all point to continental-scale organization. The refugee and adoption patterns that brought network assets into the Pride Lands mirror similar movements reported in neighboring kingdoms. The systematic appearance of orphaned cubs, exile populations, and romantic interests seeking integration suggests coordinated operations that span multiple targets simultaneously. The communication networks required for multi-generational coordination imply infrastructure that extends far beyond any single kingdom's borders. The timing precision and resource coordination demonstrated in Pride Lands operations requires logistical support that could only come from extensive territorial control. The standardized training and conditioning protocols evident in network operatives suggest centralized educational facilities that serve multiple operational theaters. The consistency of techniques across different time periods and geographical locations indicates institutional programs that transcend individual kingdom boundaries. The political intelligence that enabled precise vulnerability targeting implies surveillance networks that monitor royal families across the continent. The detailed knowledge of succession law, ceremonial requirements, and family dynamics demonstrated by network operatives suggests systematic intelligence gathering that covers multiple kingdoms simultaneously. Beyond the known world, the chilling implications. The evidence suggests that the techniques perfected against the Pride Lands represent just the initial phase of a campaign that extends far beyond the African kingdoms. The systematic approach to governmental destabilization, the sophisticated understanding of royal psychology, and the patient multi-generational planning all indicate capabilities that could threaten established orders worldwide. The philosophical warfare targeting the circle of life provides a template that could be adapted against any belief system that supports governmental stability. The methods proven effective against monarchy could be modified to target democratic institutions, religious hierarchies, or any other organizational structure that depends on public trust and institutional continuity. The breeding programs and infiltration techniques developed for royal bloodlines could be redirected against political dynasties, corporate leadership, or any other power structure that relies on family succession or trusted insider relationships. The network has demonstrated the ability to corrupt, eliminate, or replace leadership across multiple generations, capabilities that threaten far more than individual kingdoms. The timeline evidence suggests that operations against the Pride Lands may represent testing for techniques that will soon be deployed on a much larger scale. The accelerating pace of attacks, the increasing precision of targeting, and the systematic refinement of methods all point toward preparation for simultaneous operations across multiple targets. Perhaps most disturbing is the realization that if such sophisticated networks can operate undetected for generations within relatively small kingdoms, the potential scope of their operations in larger, more complex political environments becomes almost unimaginable. The techniques that nearly succeeded against the Pride Lands could be devastating when applied to targets with greater resources, larger populations, and more complex vulnerabilities. The master plan revealed through Pride Lands operations represents just the visible portion of a conspiracy that may extend far beyond anything previously conceived. The evidence points to systematic warfare against the fundamental structures that enable peaceful civilization, a threat that makes conventional military conflicts seem primitive by comparison. The question is no longer whether such networks exist or what they're capable of achieving. The evidence from the Pride Lands provides clear proof of both. The question is, what other kingdoms, what other institutions, what other fundamental beliefs are currently under similar assault by networks whose patience, resources, and sophistication we're only beginning to understand. The Pride Lands survived, barely, but survival of one target doesn't eliminate the threat. It only proves the methods work and provides the network with valuable data for their next attempt. Somewhere, they're already planning the next operation, incorporating lessons learned from their failures, and preparing for a campaign that may succeed where the Pride Lands operation fell short. The master plan continues. The war is far from over.